or 7, he and his brother and his family lived close to a little creek. And it was in Pennsylvania, and his mother slipped on a rock, and one leg went into the water. She was not hurt, but when they got back to the house, the nylon that she had on that leg dissolved. Tells you something about what was in the water. Then they moved, and he was still close to water, and so his lifetime interest and his vocation became one of being a water chemist. He has several patents, so he learned lots about water in addition to being interested in it. So in the early 90s, he decided he wanted to start collecting quilts. He didn't know anything about quilts, except he had walked by a gallery in New York City and saw one of Joan Lintall's quilts. She has some quilts in her collection. And sometimes they've been on view, but there aren't any on view right now. So he thought, I'd like to collect those. I'd like to have that much art around me. So in the early 90s, he was in a meeting and went to a quilt show and asked someone how he could start to learn about quilts and collect quilts. And they recommended Penny McMorris, who had helped artists and Robert James, who were responsible for the almost 1,000 quilts coming to Nebraska. So that great connection, and now you're going to see about 1/3 of his collection. And this one is on water because he's commissioned these people to make a quilt that would represent water. He's a great storyteller, so you're going to hear lots of stories about these quilts. This is the first one that he commissioned, and it's Susan Shy. She lives in Ohio, and her quilts always have lots and lots and lots of writing on them. And so when he commissioned her, she said, I'm going to make it about you, Jack. And he said, no. And Penny McMorris, his guide, said, let her go. So it is about Jack. It says Jack the cat. It has his daughter's name, his granddaughter's name, and Jack's pump. And then she just writes and writes and writes. So I think one of the really important things about Jack Walsh is when he commissions people, he works with them, and he likes to work with them. And so in this case, Gail Frost and Duncan Slade, when Jack was a child and his interest in water, his grandparents lived in northern New York State, and there was a waterfall nearby. So when he commissioned Gail Frost and Duncan Slade to do a water quilt, they researched and went to that site in northern New York and made this piece. I think part of it's hand dyed. You can see big hand stitches that show, it makes it look like the water's moving, which is pretty impressive. And then it's framed. There aren't usually pieces that are framed, but sometimes they are. And if you know anything about Gail Frost and Duncan Slade, a lot of their other pieces are framed with wood and they're painted. And there was just one on exhibit in the last exhibit in the Corral Gallery that we'll be going back to. This piece is by Tim Harding, and it's silk. Somehow he has a way in creating the way the fabric is. You see the ripples in the water? I think it's just amazing to be able to have that gift. And on the label it says that there is reverse applique. And it took me a while, but the head and the part of the swimmer apparently was cut out when he was finished making it. He cut out a hole and a space for this part of the swimmer and this part. So those of you who are quilters, and I think there are several in the group, reverse applique to the rest of you just mean, applique is a French word which means to apply. So you put it on top. Reverse applique is the same opposite of that. Reverse means the opposite. So there's a place cut out, whatever shape, and then something's put behind it, and then it's stitched down. So that's reverse applique. I had somebody ask what that was, so I'm trying to be better about explaining it. So I'm just enchanted with this piece that has the ripples, and I think, as far as I can see, it's flat construction.
Yeah, but it looks 3D.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
it does, and it's silk, which I love. This is an Ellen Ann Eddy piece. I took a day class from her a long time ago, and I guess that she usually does her pieces from her dreams, and she hadn't been dreaming, so she was very concerned about that. And then she had a dream about a polar bear and created this piece. And you'll notice that it's really, has sort of a filmy look. She uses layer upon layer upon layer of a very sheer fabric. And that's what creates that light and filmy look. So there would be that in this piece too. Her pieces often have animals, and of course this one has the polar bear, because that's what she dreamt about. But when I took a class probably 15 years ago from her, she was doing lots of things like this with fish and turtles and frogs, and usually nature kinds of things. Okay?
Great.
I think this artist, whose name is John Lefholz, has a sense of humor, because this piece he calls Monet over money. And he has not coins, but what's the other? Bills.
Bills.
Printed with Monet's face on them. And then he says, as I find it in my notes, art and greed should be strangers. Think about that. So that's what's printed on all those bills. And then on the dragonflies, so you don't have to get your nose up too close, I'm just going to share, because I'm a collector of quotes, I just have to share some of these. Wisdom begins on wonder, by Socrates. That's printed on one of those dragonfly wings. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And on the back side, he also has fish and the face of Monet. And the face of Monet is in sort of black smudges. And when that quilt came to Jack Walsh, he called the artist and said, "It has some kind of black smudges on the back." And he said, "Yes," and told him what those were. So, this is Wendy Hahn, and she's kind of she does satirical kinds of things. And so this one's really on ecology and water. Not that there's humor in that, but. And I'll try to keep track of my time so I don't go over. I can't talk about all of them because we've never made it out. This is a Katie Esquini Massacus. Don't try to say that fast. She is a wonderful teacher. I was privileged to take a class from her a few years ago. My piece is still in progress, almost like it was when I left the class. But this has a very interesting story, because Jack Walsh loaned it, and these quilts have been on exhibit all over the world. And when the quilts came back, this quilt box only weighed 4 pounds, and he knew that it had weighed 7 pounds before. So when he opened the box, it was empty. No quilt. So Providential, he had just been at a party with some friends and relatives who were with the FBI and they were retiring. And so he said, I think I'll just have somebody get on this. And so he told them and they said, oh, we're looking for a project. So several months later, because Katie's name was on the back of the quilt, not Jack's, it came back to Katie. It had been in some storage place all that time. So we have to be careful when we ship things, and when you do it, sometimes you just have to kiss it goodbye and hope. I had one lost but found. So this is one of the things that she teaches. She does something that she really likes to do, mostly from photography, and then she creates. She teaches that for a while, and then she says, I need to do something new. So then she starts on another project. So she has several books out, and I think this is on the cover of one of them. This is a piece by Ruth McDowell, and I feel extremely privileged to have had 6 different 3-day workshops with her. She's been a great influence in my life, and in my quilting especially. So she uses fabrics. She has a stash that would have a good top. And so you'll notice there are fish, when you look closely, there are fish down here at the bottom. But the ones up here stand out more, and that's just her choice of fabrics. She's a great artist. She's a graduate of MIT. She's a botanist, and she made her living early on by her graduate work, and then was divorced and raised 2 daughters selling her artwork. So her pieces are all over in corporate offices, and she's no longer teaching, but on the back of this is something unique. We don't often see the backs of quilts, but in this exhibit you're seeing several for a reason. She has printed all the history of her family in cod fishing. She lives in Massachusetts, and apparently her family is from there too. So on this poster board, you'll find the text that's up here because the staff didn't want us close enough to be able to read that, and I'm not sure we could even if we got close. But there are photographs of her family, and that's all in print here, which I think is just remarkable. And when you look closely, you can see where the buttons are sewn on and all of her phenomenal quilting. She does her own quilting. This is a piece that when Jack commissioned the artist, he called her a couple of months later and he said, how's it coming? She said, I haven't started. I've been reading. So she'd been reading religious kinds of things about water. And so you see depicted feet being washed. And then this depicts, I think, raindrops. So I'm intrigued with this piece, and I've had someone from Wisconsin on a tour recently, and she knew about this area in Wisconsin. And I haven't looked that up yet, but she's afraid that this really did come to fruition. The name of it is the Proposed Deep Pit Mine Site in Lynn Township in Wisconsin. It has layers and layers and layers of thread, and again, it's 3-dimensional. So, she has the map of the area, and so let's hope that it still looks like that in Wisconsin, but it may not. What do you think this is? What does this look like?
It looks like
Mountains, river.
Go ahead.
It kind of looks like a rainbow, but it's swirled.
Okay.
reminds me of Yellowstone.
Yellowstone?
Paint pots. Yeah,
It's geysers. It's velvet or velveteen, think it's velveteen. And this person died in 1986, so we can't get any answers. 1984 maybe, so she died shortly after. A friend and I volunteer in collections. If you're in collections, you get to see these up close and personal. So we do that twice a month, and we didn't accession this piece like we usually do. We just looked at it because none of these quilts belong to the museum. They all belong to Jack Walsh. But when you look closely, there are figures. There's one, there's swimmers. There's a hand. I think somebody counted 6 one day. Anyway, I think it's probably airbrushed. It just says it's Procyon dye, but it has to be airbrushed. I don't see how else it could be done. Anyway, it's a very impressive piece. She might have started with this gold color fabric and then sprayed it. Hard to tell, and we're not gonna know, unfortunately. These 2 pieces are by Terry Hancock Mangut, and she grew up in the Cincinnati area across the river from Cincinnati in Kentucky. She's probably best known for her embellishment. She really started the embellishment series probably in the 80s. She has everything imaginable that you could sew on. She always starts with a traditional quilt piece behind all this, which is kind of incredible, except she really believes in that traditional part. And so she does that first, and then she has somebody else quilt it, and then she has it out on a flat surface, and she said, I can just embellish, sit and enjoy and think. And so it might take 3 years for her to embellish stuff. But this one especially represents water, I think, because there's so much, forgotten my science, how much is our body made of? What percentage of our body is water? Anybody know?
90.
I'd have to ask my person, but I know. Anyway, that's what's going through that body. And then we're told that part of her mother's wedding dress or wedding veil, I think, is up there in the left-hand part. And then just bead after bead after bead. And what she calls stones, these small stone-shaped pieces. Okay, notice that this is a drain on the back of this quilt. So how water works or doesn't work on the front, but I think it's just intriguing that she printed a drain on the back. This is Pauline Burbridge's work, and we're going to, I'm sorry, I almost backed.
No, I was trying to stare at
Okay.
this photography.
This is a Pauline Burbridge piece, and the Jameses were very influential in getting her started and keeping her going. And she says that she must have been pretty brave, because when she finished a piece and had a few, she would take it to a gallery and say, this is what I have, will you show it? And they did, which gave her a lot of confidence. And there are several of her pieces in the permanent collection. The piece, of course, are with Jack Walsh, and there's another one of her on the other side. This is kind of this is a 1995 piece. At that time, I think she lived in England now. She and her husband, who's an artist, live on the coast of Scotland. So she's more influenced by that and does more nature-related things, some cyanotypes, and just more nature-related. The one behind you would be one of my favorites. It's Sue Benner. Sue Benner is a biologist, and her pieces often are not always seams, but they always have lots and lots of different fabrics. And there are at least 2 other pieces of hers in the permanent collection.
She lives in Texas, doesn't she?
Yes, she's from Texas. And this piece is a Therese May piece. Her pieces often have what she calls a rag rug or a braided rug. And you can see that in the large circular piece with lots of other objects. And she's another one who does heavy, heavy embellishments. And so you'll notice these shells. These are painted. She also paints. And I don't know, there are eyelets on this side and the bottom and this side. They're all the way around. I can't imagine that it hangs any other way, so I'm not sure about why the eyelets are there. But we don't usually get all that provenance. We get some. This is a piece that the artist was here recently. It's Shin-Hee Shin, and she's Korean. She came from South Korea, and she says that about half of her life was spent in South Korea, and now she lives in the States. So she said she has that contrast of the way she grew up, of religion, back and forth, and all the other things that might happen to someone who is an immigrant. And she talked about, when we had an opportunity to visit with her, these 5 circles represent the horses in Revelations. So if you read Revelations, you might know a little more about that. I was fascinated with the technique, and some of you might be too, and I'm not sure I have it all, but she's still teaching, and she says she had it on her phone. She peeled out her phone and went to her site and showed us, but the tag still says, no, now it says, at first it said machine quilted, now it says hand quilted. So she takes a very long thread, or textured thread, and it would go all the way across. And then she starts with a different thread and goes through and catches. And then she had an extra little technique, which I'd have to see a better transcription. Anyway, and perhaps this is the moon or the sun, and I think it's just a wonderful piece. Any comments or questions about what you've seen so far?